I'm J.R. Kerr, CEO of Handshake. Welcome to another one of our interviews on the Impact Executive. I have here with me a dear friend, actually, and a colleague, Anna Klein, Senior Vice President of Global Corporate Affairs and Global Communications at the Estée Lauder Companies. Anna, thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, JR. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So for those of you that are new to these Impact Executive profiles, let me just give you a teeny little bit about it. And we're just going to jump right in and dig into some of Anna's experience in this work. We believe at Handshake that the Impact Executive is an individual sitting inside of a corporation that intends to leverage the assets and the business, the core business of a company for the sake of real impact in society. We think that we've seen a historic shift, especially over the last 18 months, of impact sitting at the edges of companies and really moving to its center, to its core. I have to say that Estée Lauder Companies, and Anna in particular, along with a number of her colleagues, have really been at the heart of figuring this shift out, if only because the pandemic had such a tremendous and honestly dramatic impact on women in the workforce. And this is something that the Estée Lauder Companies has really been thinking deeply about. So Anna, just to jump in, as an executive, and honestly, I'll say it, you wouldn't probably say this about yourself, but as a rising executive, somebody that's really navigating, moving throughout a large corporation, can you just talk about some of the obstacles and opportunities? Just what does it look like to navigate a corporation like the Estée Lauder Companies and really kind of lead in a way that you're looking to have both impact in the company, but also impact in society?
It's such a good question. I'll start personally first, and I'll start with the word executive, because it's never been a word that I've been comfortable with for me, because to me, the word executive conjures up an image of someone sitting behind a desk, with a sheaf of papers and, dictating. I see impact as very action oriented and, having the willingness to roll up your sleeves, to be incredibly collaborative, to be very clear in your intention and be able to make that intention known across an organization. And for a company like the Estée Lauder Companies, and those listening who may not be familiar, we were, founded by an incredible entrepreneurial woman who started with one brand, but now we have 30 brands in our portfolio. Each of those brands has its own individual identity. And we have a family at our core that's still very involved in the business. And then as a growing business, we are the world's largest prestige beauty company. We have the complexity of, continuing to deliver profit and market share for the organization while also staying true to our values. So when it comes to something like impact, it's actually in an organization like ours that has a family at its core and is really focused on identity. The impact conversation is about making sure, one, that you're understanding the complexities of the business and understanding the pathways to conversation, that you are showing up in those conversations with a brand, region, or function in the most relevant and appropriate way, and then being really clear and articulate about the business case. And in our case, the business case is usually very personal because it is about the stakeholders that we're serving every day.
It's a great answer. Thank you. Let's just, dig into one of those stakeholders. The pandemic has disproportionately affected women in the workplace. We were already facing massive gaps when it came to gender equality, fair pay, these sorts of things. We continue to face them, but now we face them in a way that we've never faced them before, at least in our lifetime. Can you talk a little bit about both how you see this as a leader inside of a company like the Estée Lauder Companies, and maybe even a little bit about what you all have learned and what you're doing at the Estée Lauder Companies to address this significant issue that we face coming out of the pandemic?
Yeah, I've been very proud of how the company has shown up, particularly during coronavirus. It's obviously for all of us one of the hardest things we hopefully will have to face in our lifetime, with the level of complexity and pain and heartbreak and just confusion. But we as an organization from the very first had a people first mentality. And that did start with our employees. And, one of my bosses, William Lauder, said very early on, we will not be remembered by how we managed through this as a business, but we will be remembered by how we treated our employees and our consumers and everyone that we work with. And we had a small group come together where we built principles in how we would operate. And it said people first. And our intention was at every decision we have to make, and knowing that some of those decisions were going to have to be really hard, that people would be impacted. There's no way to get around that. We pledged as an organization to do that with humanity, to do that with people's well-being at the heart of every decision that we made, and to be transparent about it, to not try and sugarcoat the hard decisions that we had to make. And for an organization like ours that includes a very complex employee model where we have corporate employees, we have retail employees, we have manufacturing and distribution employees, all of them were going to be impacted very differently. So that approach of transparency, of saying, we're going to tell you what we know, and we're going to tell you what we don't know. And we're going to be really honest about when the impact is going to come to your door, but then also creating a space for employees to engage and providing the tools for engagement. And women, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we're 84% women.
Right.
And so there was no way to leave off the table the impacts that women were feeling from a societal perspective, but also being able to keep our business up and running and productive. We're a highly productive organization, knowing that family concerns, personal family concerns, were going to be at the center of our employees' success. So at the earliest stages, the conversations were about, okay, how do we start to disrupt and tear down some of the conventions around how we work and what a workday looks like and what productivity looks like, so people could manage their lives accordingly.
That's great. It's a great segue into actually, I think, a really important point, and actually something we're wrestling with at Handshake, to be honest, just as we think about this issue. So there was two sort of competing articles recently. One was in the last year, let's call it. One was in the New York Times. It was an op-ed that essentially said boys are raised for competence, or boys are raised for confidence, girls are raised for competence, and then that plays out. You have, I guess it's like 85 to 90% of the best performing students in high school and colleges are women, but then you have, it flips and it's like 80, 90% men are leading as executives, and CEOs. So, the case the article was making is that this is a confidence issue. Then there was another article that came out in Forbes that actually said, nope, we disagree. This isn't about women not having confidence and men not having competence. This is about workplaces being designed in a way that actually rewards masculine forms of confidence, or even masculine approaches to growth, and not actually celebrating and rewarding feminine approaches to growth. I think there's probably points to be made on either side, but I think what both these articles do is they put a finger on how we design work environments equitably. Mm-hmm. And right, I think that's the real issue that's kind of in tension here. So I guess number one, I would be curious to have you react to just this dialogue that's happening around competence and confidence and rewarding, both men and women in the workplace. And then two, what lessons have you learned at Estée, the Estée Lauder companies, about designing workplaces that actually achieve equality?
Oh, that's such a fascinating conversation.
It really is.
So I'll start personal first, right? Because you can't get away from how your personal views of something impact how you operate in a work environment. But to me, I think there's two things: my gender, but also my color, right? So how I identify as a person of color, but then there's also how I identify as a woman. I always felt that it wasn't about confidence, because I always felt confident, but it was about, I have something to prove. And so there was an element of, and I think a lot of people, and women in particular, feel this way, that you are constantly trying to earn your space, right? And it takes a high degree of confidence to earn your space, right? Because you have to, any insecurities that come in are going to sort of pull away from your ability to earn your space. I do think that's a very different journey than men have had to take historically. And again, I always hesitate to make blanket statements, because I believe everybody shows up to the table with a different challenge. But I think in an organization like ours, on one side, because we are so heavily skewed female, there is, gender conflict that arises, as you are rising in an organization that is primarily women. And I think a lot of that conflict stems from, one, proving yourself, or what does the proper executive look like, act like, what does their personal life look like? What do they bring to the table? Or do you feel like you have to hide aspects of yourself so that you can prove who you are and be able to succeed? Whether that's your educational background, your socioeconomic background, your business background. So I think for me, my personal struggle has been probably around proving myself through the lens of hard work matters, which I truly, truly believe hard work matters. I don't show up to the table, coming from an Ivy League organization, I don't show up to the table, necessarily in a certain socioeconomic, background. So I think for organizations like ours, I think what we have to disrupt, first of all, is how women and people rise within an organization, which our company is doing, and they've started to do. I'm super proud that we've recently announced a role at the highest levels of our organization that is just primarily focused on equity. Are we providing the right pipeline to opportunities where it is through the lens of hard work and leadership capability, and that we are really trying to understand the mechanisms of how our organization works, right? How you're able to meet the right people, how you're able to have a voice at the table, so that people can have the opportunity. And to me, it's the access to opportunity to be able to rise in an organization. So that's a long-winded answer where, personally, I came to a point probably, 8 years ago where I felt like I needed to pull back from feeling like I had to prove something. What I needed to lean in on is the quality of my work and, feeling really good about what I was able to achieve, and also feeling very open to different pathways of achieving what I wanted to achieve. So
that's great. That was a great segue to one of the last two questions that I want to ask. And I've seen this, Anna, in your life. You do an amazing job at thinking about the next generation. And I think, honestly, one of the things that I love about you is you're equitable. It's not just women that are coming up, it's also men. It's both. And that's how it should be, actually. But there is a need, I think, to focus on the fact that I think the workplace has struggled to be equitable for both. And I have seen you navigate that carefully, and I think that's important. And so I guess I just would ask, what's a piece of advice you would give your 28-year-old self, thinking about where you've been, where you are now, and even what you see in front of you? What would you say to that 28-year-old?
I had so much fun when I was 28. It's a particularly good year.
Nice.
But I think what I would have said to myself at 28 is to pull back on sort of this self-righteous thinking. When I was 28, I was still in the nonprofit space. I was still, thought of myself as an artist. And I thought about the corporate space in corporate America as impenetrable when it came to values. And so I think what I would have told myself then is to be more open to environments where I would be able to expand my point of view, right? Because although back then I thought I had a very, I thought I understood the world and I thought I was doing good in the world, but I was doing it through a very sort of narrow lens because I felt that was the only way that I could have impact. I think I could have moved faster if I had pushed myself to expand my world and to expand my thinking, and to not be so, if I could be self-aware, not be so prejudicial about different sectors and areas of opportunity in my own career. I came to that 2-3 years later and started on that journey for myself. But I think I could have been a much more well-rounded individual if I had had that thinking back then. But it was a really fun year.
Nice. That's awesome. Last question, and thank you for your time. We really appreciate it. So when we talk about the impact executive, we talk about 5 virtues, things like authenticity, humility, actually. One of the words that we talk a lot about is courage. C.S. Lewis defined courage as every virtue at its testing point. This idea that when you get tested, when your ideals get tested, your values get tested, that's when courage comes into play. I'm just curious, what would you say about the courage that's needed to lead as an impact executive in the world today?
Such a good question. I think you have to have the courage to, again, know what you don't know. You have to have the courage to ask questions. And I think for anyone hoping to make impact, you have to be able to look at your job through the lens of being in service of the organization that you're working for, or working in, and the society that you're living in. And I think, and I hope if people from my company are watching this, that they don't get irritated at me for saying this, but you always have to be open to things not working out. You have to be open to really understanding what it is within yourself that's driving your ambition, that's driving your need for impact. Some people, unfortunately, that's driven by ego. Some people that's driven by, too much self-righteousness or self-aggrandizement or your place in the world. So it is finding that balance of knowing what you're capable of, having the courage to ask the right questions in service of the company or organization you're working in. And then 3, having the right balance of humility and knowing that it's not about, it is, yes, you want to be able to advance, because as you advance, you're able to make more impact. People trust your judgment. People bring you around the table. But you have to always be open to saying, there's a moment where I need to step back and we need to prioritize other things. Now the impact is around other aspects of the business. And it's a hard balance, right?
Yeah, it is. It's great. I love it. I love it. Well, thank you, Anna. We appreciate you. And, as you know, and, I'm happy to say that Handshake has been really we love working with the Estée Lauder companies. And I affirm everything you're saying, that you guys are fighting the good fight. You're trying to figure this out. Nobody's doing it perfectly, but I think, as that famous quote goes, to be in the arena, trying to figure it out, right? Like that's where you want to be. And you all are certainly in the arena, and you and a number of your colleagues have led the way. And it's been fun to be part of the journey. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely.